In the last video, I talked about what presence actually looks like and how staying emotionally available without trying to force an outcome changes the entire dynamic. This video is about something that naturally follows presence, which are boundaries. A lot of people hear the word boundaries and they might immediately picture something sharp or rigid. They imagine ultimatums, silence, emotional distance, or just some version of take it or leave it. And sometimes that's exactly how boundaries are taught. But most of the time, what people call a boundary isn't actually a boundary, it's just protection. Real boundaries aren't punishments, they're not a way to control someone else's behavior. A boundary is a way of staying aligned with yourself. It's a decision about what you will stay available for and what you won't. You can usually feel the difference in the body. There's no rush, no sharp edge, and no need to prove a point. It just feels clear, like something inside of you quietly settled into place. A dysregulated boundary feels different. It can feel tight, urgent. It can sometimes feel cold or final. And there's usually a sense of, I need this to change right now, or I'm done with this. And that urgency usually comes from fear, not from alignment. Here's a simple example. Someone might say, if you don't do this, I'm done. On the surface, that sounds like a boundary, but in the body, it usually carries pressure, threat, or fear. It's not coming from steadiness. It's coming from the need to regain control. And most people don't do this because they're manipulative. They do it because they don't feel safe. So the boundary becomes a way to protect themselves instead of a way to stay aligned. A regulated boundary sounds quieter. It might sound like, I'm not available for this kind of interaction. Not as a threat or a punishment, but just as a statement of truth. Here's another example. Imagine you're talking to someone and the conversation keeps turning into arguments. You notice your body getting tight, your chest start to feel heavy, your thoughts start racing. A dysregulated boundary might sound like, whatever, do what you want, I'm done talking to you. That usually comes with distance, frustration, or shutting down. A regulated boundary might look different. You pause, you notice what's happening in your body first. You let the urgency settle. And then you say something like, I don't feel steady in this conversation right now. I'm gonna take some space and we can talk about it later. It's the same boundary, but very different energy. One pushes away and the other stays aligned. This is an important distinction, by the way. A real boundary doesn't try to change the other person. It changes your level of participation. It's not about controlling what they do. It's about being honest about what you can stay present for. This is also why boundaries without presence often feel like punishment or withdrawal. And sometimes this shows up in very quiet ways. For example, imagine one person isn't ready for physical intimacy in the moment. They say no, not because they don't care, but because their body hasn't settled. It doesn't feel settled enough yet. And the other person, without realizing it, gets quieter, more distant, and a little colder. Not as a punishment, not as a strategy, but just because something inside of them felt rejected or disconnected. But on the receiving end, it can feel very different. It can feel like when I set a boundary, the warmth disappears. If I say no, the connection changes. Maybe I'm only wanted under certain conditions. And even if that wasn't the intention, the nervous system still feels the shift. That's why presence matters so much when boundaries are involved. Because the boundary itself isn't what breaks safety. It's the emotional withdrawal that sometimes follows it. And presence without boundaries can turn into collapse or over accommodation. For example, someone might keep saying yes to things that don't actually feel good to them. They stay present, they stay kind and open, but inside they start to feel resentful, tired, or invisible. Nothing explodes on the surface, but something inside them slowly disconnects. That isn't alignment, that is self-abandonment. Leadership requires both boundaries and presence. A boundary, at its core, it's very simple. It says, I'm still here, but not for that. Sometimes a boundary creates more respect. Sometimes it creates distance. But either way, it restores alignment inside of you. And that alignment is what allows real connection to either stabilize or end cleanly. Boundaries aren't about controlling outcomes. They're they're about staying connected to yourself while you stay connected to others. In the next video, I'll talk about how to pace connection without rushing intimacy or forcing certainty. Because pacing is what protects safety before boundaries are ever needed.